There are 3 ways you can give to support the love-focused, culture-changing, ever-evolving, community-building, Jesus-inspired work of the Village. You can text the word GIVE to 404-998-8979, 404-998-8979, or you can give online at thevillageatlanta.com/give, thevillageatlanta.com/give, or you can mail a check to the Village Church, 3418 Dogwood Drive, Hapeville, Georgia, 30354. Now let's get ready to get better so that we can do better, so that we can be better. Let's have church.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the Village Church. I'm especially excited today because at my house right this minute, there's one of our small groups at the Village, and they are going to watch the service with us. And then right after the service, we're going to have a Sunday lunch with them. And so that's very exciting to me. I'm glad you've chosen to be a part as well, especially through this series called The Happiness Project. We've told you this before. We did this series a couple of years ago before COVID. We did it in the summer, basically the same time of the year as we're doing it right now. And it was, we felt, one of our most effective series, so much so that we wanted to show it again. And then I thought this was particularly exciting. 2 of our newest people at the Village, Daryl and Mackenzie, they wrote me and they said, "You won't believe it. We've been listening to TED Talks, and many of the things we're hearing on the TED Talks are things that we have been hearing in the Happiness Project." And so that was really exciting to me because we've always wanted to help people get better, do better, be better. And I really think the Happiness Project kind of had that effect. And so glad you're watching. Today we're going to be talking about knowledge and wisdom. And those 2 things are hugely important. And I think our world is lacking in both of those. And I'm lacking in both of those too. I want to do better, and I hope you do too. Let me pray, and then we're going to get into the service today, okay? God, thank you for every person watching. Thank you for every life that is going to be touched hopefully by this broadcast. And I just pray that we would all realize how good you are, how loving you are, and how much you really care. And our lives would be enriched by series like the ones we're watching right now. Thank you for every person that's a part of our Village family, whether they live locally or whether they're around the world. And I just pray blessings on everyone, and I thank you for this day. And I pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Let's get into our study, all right? Marcus Aurelius ruled over the Roman Empire from the years 161 to 180 CE. He was an intellectual emperor. He was a philosopher and a writer. His collection of philosophical writings called Meditations are where we get much of our understanding of the ancient philosophy called Stoicism. Stoics, for those who maybe don't know this, believe that we are social beings and we find happiness by living in the now and accepting this moment as it is. It contrasts with hedonist, and we talked about the hedonistic philosophy last week, which is a belief that life is about pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain. Instead, the Stoic says we should engage our brains and work to understand how the world works and work on making the world around us better. Marcus Aurelius said this: "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts." Aurelius was in agreement with the Apostle Paul, who wrote that our thoughts should be focused on things that are excellent, admirable, true, holy, just, pure, lovely, and worthy of praise. Aurelius was saying the same thing. As we continue to learn about how to be happier people, which has been our goal this whole summer, it's important for us to be a little repetitive because it is only when we invest time and energy in understanding the information that we're trying to teach on Sundays and then putting it into practice that we truly can benefit from it. So I'm trying to do the best preparation I can be to be able to share the best information I can share, and it's important for you to listen to it and then repeat it over and over in your mind and then put it into practice if you're ever going to see real benefit. Let me share with you a few of the important principles we've talked about this summer. First one that I talk about now almost every week to somebody is 50% of happiness is determined by your genetic makeup. Let me say that again. 50% of your happiness is determined by your genetic makeup. You have your mom and dad and grandmoms and granddads to thank for 50% of kind of how it is. That is totally out of your control. You're born with it. 10% of your happiness level is determined by life events. If you won the lottery this past Friday night, you're up a little bit. Your bump is up. If you bought all the tickets of the lottery with your paycheck and you didn't win, you're down. That's 10%, and sometimes that's something you caused. Sometimes it's something you didn't cause. Maybe it's the death in a family, or maybe it's something beyond your control. But that leaves 40% that's controlled by your thoughts and actions. So I understand some people maybe genetically have a low happiness quotient, but if they put into practice these things we're teaching, they can affect 40% or raise their happiness level wherever it starts out. They can raise it 40%. Genetics gives us, here's the second thing, genetics gives us a happiness set point. It's a baseline that's relatively consistent throughout life. Good things temporarily bump it up, bad things temporarily bump it down, but it always bounces back. I never will forget talking to Amy Copeland, and I asked her, Amy, is it true that lottery winners, when they have looked at people who won the lottery, it doesn't matter how much money they won, a year later, their happiness level is exactly what it was before they won the lottery? And is it conversely true with people who have lost limbs, like Amy had lost all 4 of her limbs? Is it also true that a year after an accident, people's happiness level goes back to exactly where it was before the accident took place or before the lottery was won? And she said that's exactly true. That's the happiness set point. Third thing we've talked about is it's possible to transcend our genetic happiness set points if we learn about certain happiness practices and we incorporate these practices into our lives. That's what we're trying to do. Listen, you may go to a church that doesn't feel like happiness is important. It is important. It's very important. The Bible speaks about our happiness, our joy. It's something that we want you to experience, and we want to help you become happier people. Often what we think makes us happy doesn't. But there's a whole other group of practices, that's the ones that we've been looking at in our series, that actually can contribute to you being a happier, more joyous person. Today we're going to talk first about the idea of knowledge as an important component in lifelong happiness. Now, not everybody believes that this should be on the list. Let me ask you a question. Is ignorance really bliss? Have y'all heard that saying? Ignorance is bliss. We've heard the phrase, and I think the idea behind the phrase is there's something about innocence when we just don't know any better. There's something about that. I used to wish I could go back to that place of simple naivete. I remember when I thought everything was just so easy to understand. There were good people and there were bad people. There were ins and there were outs. It was all dualistic. It was very easy, friend or foe. But as I have gotten older, I have realized that's not really the way we work. But some people think innocence is bliss. I'd rather stay in that posture. Many people long for the simpler days so much. I'm sure we all know people who seem to live happy-go-lucky lives. They avoid things like politics. They don't want to hear the details about immigrant refugees being treated harshly, or about the problems of inequitable education, or the abuse of people in power. They don't want that. They stick their fingers in their ears and they go, no, 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 no. They don't want to hear it because they believe ignorance is bliss. On the other side of the fence, we also know people who know all about the struggles and injustices in the world, and they focus so much on that. They are so overwhelmed with the struggles of life, they find it nearly impossible to take breaks from how hard life is because they're just overwhelmed by what's going on in the world. I believe there's a problem with both the ignorance is bliss camp and the everything is doomed camp. Both extremes involve living life with such a small, nearsighted focus that you don't get full perspective. Existing in either of those places means missing that real, deep, lasting happiness is strengthened and often polished by painful situations we have to go through. There is another path. It's the path I'm excited to talk about today, and it's a path that can help you into happiness, and that path is knowledge. Jesus taught that knowledge of the truth can set you free. Knowledge is a good thing. Now, I felt a certain tension when I was growing up about knowledge. On one hand, I grew up in a home that put a lot of value on learning. I know I talk to you about my dad all the time. I'm sorry, he's just the most significant adult figure, male figure in my life. And his birthday was yesterday, so happy birthday, Daddy Ray. If you're watching this, he's 76. But my dad's one of the smartest people I've ever known. My dad, when he was 15 years old, scored perfect on the math portion of the SAT in the 1950s. He was awarded a scholarship full ride to any of the military institutions he wanted to go to in America had he chose to pursue that. My dad loved learning, and my dad loved reading. Books were so important in our house. If you damaged a book by misusing it, that was a high crime. That wasn't a misdemeanor. That was a big deal. I remember when I was 9 years old, I experienced my favorite Christmas ever. While everybody else was rejoicing with Hot Wheels and these jumpy hippity hop things, I got 10 books for Christmas. And that's when I first began to read, and I fell in love with those books. And then I just became a voracious reader because that was a big deal in our house. The maddest my dad ever got at me was in high school. I was messing around and not paying attention to learning, and I remember him calling me into his bedroom and having me sit on the edge of his bed and him telling me through clenched teeth, and my dad is a sweet, jolly man now, but through his clenched teeth, he looked like Brutus from Popeye back in the day. I mean, he had a black beard and he looked so intimidating that he had raised me to be more than a jock, and he knew I had a good brain and he expected me to use it. And it's like, yes, sir, I understand. So I had my dad on one side pulling me towards knowledge, but I also loved church so much. And in church, there was this subtle sense that knowledge wasn't good, or any knowledge that I obtained outside of church wasn't good. Maybe I misremember this because I loved the place, the church I grew up in. It was a little country church, and there was so much good about it, but in my memory, they didn't seem to think learning outside of what the church taught was important. There seemed to be a mistrust of professional people. I remember that. There seemed to be a mistrust of any info that did not come directly from the Bible. There seemed to be a definite mistrust of academics. I never will forget the last Sunday I was there, I was going to be going away to university, so it was a big deal. Ray is going, and my dad's name is Ray, so they call me Little Ray at the church. If I go back there now at 240 pounds, I'm still Little Ray. They're so happy Little Ray is here. It's like nobody calls me Little Ray. Anyway, I was leaving to go away to college, and every person in that church pulled me aside and said, you need to be very careful when you go off to college because they're going to try to teach you some things, and you just need to put that out of your mind and don't listen to them. And they were fearful about knowledge. And I went off to university with all of these, everything up. I'm just not, it's like every professor is like this. I'm not going to believe what they say because I'm a Christian and we have the full knowledge in our little country church in Jonesboro that I'll need in life. And I didn't realize that's not the case. So I had this tension, learn everything you can learn from my dad, and then not so sure you need to learn anything outside of church from my church. The people I grew up in church with might have been nervous about knowledge, but you know what I've learned? God is not nervous about knowledge. God loves knowledge. Proverbs 20:15 says this, gold there is and rubies in abundance, but lips that speak knowledge are a rare jewel. I've discovered that we don't have to be nervous about truth. And I have discovered that all truth is God's truth. Let me say that again. All truth is God's truth. It doesn't matter if Buddha said it. It doesn't matter if Rumi said it. It doesn't matter if Stephen Hawking, the atheist astronomer, said it, or if Jesus said it. If they say it and it's true, it's true. And I believe that whoever says it, it still comes from the mind of the divine. And if it's not true, then I want to discard it. Do you understand? Knowledge is a great thing. I quoted Marcus Aurelius at the beginning of the talk. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. Aurelius was not a Christian. He was a pagan emperor. But his statement is true. We see it validated in other people who spoke truth. It is a good statement, so we don't mind quoting it because it's helpful. Some people in churches say the only truth you need is what is found in the Bible. They treat the Bible like it is the instruction manual and has the answer to every question in life. But that's not the intention. That was never the intention of the Bible. I like the way our good friend Stan Mitchell says it. He says this: the Bible is the spiritual travel diary of our forebears. And by the way, that's the way you spell forebears. We were shocked, but that's how you spell it. It's not the final words of God, but a medium through which the word of the Lord may come. So when we read the Bible, we're excited because we're looking at our forebears and we're reading their spiritual travel guide, what they're discovering along the way, but it is not the end all to everything. Thank God people are still learning and they're still progressing. That's important. Some of the things I was taught didn't hold up to universal truth. And when I realized that, I had to discard some things that I had been taught was in the Bible. But I had to admit either I'm understanding it wrong or it was written wrong, because these things aren't true. Children shouldn't be killed for back-talking their parents. But you can find a verse that tells you that's what you should do. Well, we don't do that. A genocide, killing a whole race of people. When we hear people talking about that, we say that's horrific, that's terrible, that's not right. But that's ascribed to God in the Old Testament. You have to put on the lens of Jesus and say, is this really the way God is? And with the lens of Jesus, we see Jesus would never say stone a child. Jesus would say, permit the children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. He would say, if any person harms one of these children, better that a rope be hanged around their neck and they be thrown into the deepest sea. Jesus would never have said that. So you have to be able to figure out what knowledge really is. Some people believe the Bible teaches that women are less capable than men, that women are, in fact, weaker in all ways than men. And that's not true. That's not true. And so we have to be able to put those things into perspective. I came to realize it's my responsibility and it's your responsibility. If we grew up in church and we have this set of knowledge in our minds we got from church, it is our adult responsibility to take everything dealing with orthodoxy, to take every belief off of the shelf and analyze it and say, is this really true? Or am I just been believing this because somebody told me to believe it? And analyze it and see if it makes sense, see if it resonates with the real Spirit of God in your heart before you say, this is what I believe. You must be willing to discover what truth really is. And don't believe it just because I said it. And don't believe it just because a television preacher said it. You have to be willing to discover with knowledge what is the truth. And then when you figure out what the truth is, you've got to be willing to submit your life to it. Let me quote Stan one more time because I think it's good. He said, I'm reminded daily that all of the books and all of the information and all of the good answers in the world are irrelevant until I'm ready to hear, until I'm willing to accept the truth, no matter the implications or consequences, until I value truth more than comfort. I really believe seeking knowledge is a beautiful way to open the door to happiness. Look at what Proverbs says. Proverbs 18:15. I love the contemporary English version. Everyone with good sense wants to learn. Everyone with good sense wants to learn. Or Proverbs 15:14. Anyone with good sense is eager to learn more, but fools are hungry for foolishness. Don't be afraid of the truth. Remember, Jesus said, knowing the truth will set you free. Knowledge impacts our happiness in several ways. The simplest way knowledge will affect our happiness is using knowledge to learn a series like we're talking about this summer and then putting it into practice. That will really affect your happiness. I am sleeping better longer than I ever have because I know we studied sleep and it was important. I'm exercising in a way that I've not exercised before. I've discovered that is important. I'm practicing social justice, something that has not been a huge part of my life, but it's something that I really believe comes from a courageous heart, and I'm putting it into practice, and it's making me happier. So you learn these things, and you put them into practice, it'll help. If you're investing time and energy into practicing these things, I believe you will become a happier person. The advantage we gain in life when we fall in love with learning are immeasurable. When we love learning, especially as we're kids, if we're kids just starting out, we will do better in school. We'll be encouraged more frequently. We'll develop more skills. We'll have a better vocabulary. We'll acquire knowledge about how to deal with complicated life circumstances when we face them. The good news is, if you grew up without a love for learning, that's okay. Some people don't come to a love for learning until later in their lives, and so you might be 50 or 60. That's all right. When you do decide you want to love learning, it lights up your brain. It forms new neural pathways that are helpful. You'll begin to feel a sense of strength, satisfaction, and confidence in your life. It's a good thing. Simply put, every day you'll feel that you've learned something. You'll feel better about yourself. You'll feel better about life. Now, I want to give you 7 practices maybe that'll help you in just gaining a little more knowledge about things in this life. So these 7 things I think will be very helpful to you. But before I give you the 7 practices, let me suggest one overarching principle that's important, and that's give yourself permission to become a curious person. I know some people that just aren't curious, but we live in a marvelous universe, and just begin to observe it a little bit and find things that interest you and study it a little bit. It'll open you up in ways you never imagined. Let me give you these 7 things quickly. Take a class. Even though we're all adults, take a class just for fun. Cooking or dancing or jewelry making or painting, whatever pulls you toward it, do it. When my wife retired 9 years ago from her job where she had worked 30-something years to DeKalb County School Board, she was looking at a life and she didn't know what to do. You know the first thing she did? She signed up for a class at the Apple store, and she would take Marta to Lenox Mall, and she would go through this class once a week to learn some of the little tricks inside the Apple computer to make her more competent. I was so proud of her, and she'd come home having learned all of these cool things. I know this is crazy, but I want to take a dance class at some point in my life because I missed that whole deal growing up. I'm kind of fused together. Nothing really moves the way it's supposed to move. And I'm just wondering if there is a teacher out there that could teach me how to ballroom dance. And so Jane and I have talked about maybe doing that one day. I hope I can do that. If it's interesting to you, take a class. Second thing, think of something you're curious about and start researching it just for fun. It's not a big deal to type it into Google, or even better, go to Quora, Quora, where you'll find answers from experts about what you're really thinking about. Let me tell you some things I've been curious about just over the last 6 months. I have spent a week or 2 researching cryptocurrencies. I talk about it, Ray McCune. And so I was interested. I was seeing it in the paper a lot and didn't really know much about it. So I began to research cryptocurrencies. I got interested for a small season in something called Forex, or the foreign exchange. It's the monetary exchange used around the world. And I just was interested, and I wanted to read a little bit about it. I have read of late how the keto diet, which is a real hot diet people like, can actually fight certain cancers. That was fascinating to me. I've been reading about the strategy of chess. I've been reading about the strategy of Texas Hold'em poker because I'd like to learn how to play poker a little bit better. I've been reading about racism in real estate, especially right after World War II, and the whole idea of redlining. And so many of you know about that, and that was changed, thank God, with the Fair Housing Act in 1968. But still, I wanted to read about what was happening to people when they came home from the war and they didn't have opportunities open up to them because of racist practices that were across the board being done in real estate. I wanted to read it, and I did. Jane told me she wanted to learn about bees, and she asked me if I would put on our Kindle some books on bees. Neil, my good friend Neil, that does a lot of this work around here, behind the scenes work, Neil told me one of the best books he's read over the last few years is on salt. S-A-L-T, salt, what you sprinkle on your food. Now, I've never been that curious. That's been one of those things that's outside of what I would say I want to read about. But he said, Ray, it's all of the history of civilization. You can follow it as you read this book on salt. So who knows, maybe one day. Third thing, read a chapter in a book just for fun. Every day till it becomes a habit. Just find something that you enjoy reading and read a chapter every day, not a big deal. Pick a topic you're interested in to commit to becoming an expert on. Buy books on that subject. You can become an expert on something sooner than you realized. Take a day off per month and venture out of your comfort zone. Explore a place you've never been. Try a new restaurant. Take a daycation. Have y'all heard of that daycation? The first person I ever heard say it was Rick Griffin on his website. We'll talk about staycation. And I think that's a great idea. Jane and I sometimes look for things to do. Just take a day and just have a full day and just go do something different, explore something we've never explored before. Subscribe to a magazine or an online newsletter about a topic that you're finding curious. Or join a Facebook group about a topic and then participate in it. These are just ideas for how do you keep growing and keep learning, because knowledge is not something to be afraid of. Knowledge can be a good thing. Scientists who study the connection between knowledge and happiness describe a cumulative effect of acquiring knowledge. As you live longer, hopefully you will have acquired more knowledge, and more knowledge enables you to make better decisions, and better decisions will lead you to better results and better outcomes based on those choices will make you have greater life satisfaction. Now, are y'all sleeping with your eyes open? I can't tell. Are y'all with me? Is everybody with me? I can't tell. Y'all need to cough every once in a while or something because it's like y'all real quiet. Y'all good? Let's review for just a minute, okay? Throughout the course of this happiness project, we've learned 9 practices so far, 9 things we've talked about. We only have a couple of more that scientists have found to genuinely improve happiness. We started with savoring. Do you remember that talk, savoring? And the practice of savoring led us to, do you remember the second part of that talk? Gratitude. That's wonderful. Then we learned about kindness. And we said kindness will lead us to, do you remember that? Social connectedness. You guys are really good. That's awesome. Is it on the screen behind me? Is that how come y'all know it? I'm thinking you're brilliant. I'm thinking, man, the teaching has been superior at this deal because they know the answer to every question. Well, doggone it. I don't feel as good now. After that, we learned about the practice of exercise, which led us to better sleep. Last week, we studied courage and how courage can bring us to justice. Today, we talked about knowledge, and there's another side to that. If you do knowledge well, it will lead us to the practice of wisdom, and that's what I want to close the talk with. In social psychology terms, knowledge is the accumulation of information, and wisdom is the product of knowledge and experience. Let me say it another way. Knowledge is the accumulation of facts and data that you've learned about or experienced. It's being aware of something and having information. Wisdom is the ability to discern and judge which aspects of that knowledge are true, right, lasting, and applicable to your life. There are many quotes and sayings about knowledge and wisdom given by the experts and great personalities of all time. Sir Francis Bacon said this, knowledge is power. You've heard that, I've heard that. Then Gautama Buddha said this, wisdom is the highest of all the 5 virtues. You've heard that. The book of Proverbs says this about wisdom, the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all you're getting, get understanding. Knowledge without wisdom is not optimal. Let me say that again. Knowledge without wisdom is not optimal. Knowledge is not as effective without wisdom to know how to apply knowledge. If you don't have wisdom that goes with knowledge, you can be simply a walking encyclopedia. I know some people like that. You want them on your team on Trivia Pursuit. I can tell you that because they know everything about everything, but they don't have wisdom for nothing. They are clueless. I have met many people, some who have doctor's degrees, but they don't have the wisdom to keep their eye on really knowing what matters most in life. They can write a book about raising children, but they don't have the wisdom to actually raise children. When a person has a lot of knowledge, they can sometimes also have a lot of arrogance, and they can have a lot of pride. And knowledge can cause a person to believe that they're elevated above those around them, and they sometimes disdain those with less education than they have. Paul warned us when he said, we know that we all possess knowledge, and knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. And then in 1 Corinthians 13:2, Paul reminds us that without love, knowledge is nothing. He said, what if I could prophesy and understand all secrets and have all knowledge? And what if I had faith that moved mountains? I would be nothing unless I loved others. Best-selling author Bob Goff said it like this, it will be people with the greatest love, not the most information, who will influence us to change. Certainly wisdom and knowledge are not the same thing. Wisdom is the ultimate goal. Information without transformation leads only to frustration. Information without transformation leads only to frustration. So how do you get wisdom? You get wisdom by paying attention, by being observers, by living through experiences, by watching what works, by watching what doesn't work, and making sure that you're filing it away. We always have the ability to grow in wisdom by listening to what others have to teach us, and also by learning by our own mistakes. Dr. Igor Grossman, along with colleagues, published his research in the Journal of Experimental Psychology on wisdom and happiness. Here are a few interesting things they found out about wisdom and happiness. Being a wise young person doesn't make you much happier than an unwise young person. So as a young person, you can be foolish or wise. It doesn't affect your happiness that much. But as you grow older, the correlation between wisdom and happiness grows stronger. Wise senior citizens are considerably happier than unwise senior citizens. I wonder why. Can you imagine if you've been unwise your whole life and now you're 70 and you're unwise and you've not learned anything from all of that? Number one, you're probably beaten to death from all your ins and outs of the ditches that you've been in your whole life. Where someone who has learned what life is and they've been able to put it together and they've been able to make wise decisions as they get older, life really does become a happier, more beautiful thing. A second thing, happiness can increase whether or not wisdom increases, but it is more likely to increase when it's connected to wisdom. You can be a happy old person without a lot of wisdom, but as wisdom increases, you will become a happier person. Just as everything else we've talked about in the Happiness Project, wisdom also has it's a circular experience. We've called it the happiness loop. Happier people tend to grow wiser, and wiser people tend to be happier. Best-selling author and former editor of The Atlantic, Robert Wright, analyzed Dr. Grossman's research, and he summed it up like this: acting wisely reduces conflict in your life and strengthens your social relationships, and this fosters a sense of well-being that makes it easier to act wisely, and so on. He continues, but there's also the vicious circle scenario, which is when you make a bad decision, spiraling down, you grow more unhappy, which means more bad decisions, and you just keep spiraling further and further and further down. With wisdom, you can cycle up to a better life. Without wisdom, you will be on a vicious cycle down. Let me give you 5 quick thoughts about developing wisdom. Of course, the Bible says you can pray and ask for wisdom. That's a beautiful thing, to pray and just ask God to help you pursue. He does it. It's not like he just pops it in your head. He makes you open to things that will give you wisdom, and you begin to grow and learn. But here's 5 additional things. Read the works of great thinkers and religious leaders. I love reading works from great religious leaders and seeing how they were thinking, what was the wise thing they were trying to do. Consider the wisest person you know. When making big decisions, get their advice. When making small decisions, imagine what they would do. You know, the what would Jesus do little thing? I think that was kind of the idea, but sometimes that's a little lofty. Maybe you should say, what would Mr. Rogers do? I mean, if you just need somebody that you can think, what's somebody I can see, what's the wise thing to do here? Number 3, study the lives of prominent people in history and learn how they made decisions and what was wise about their decision. Volunteer at a nursing home, interview residents there, talk to older people, find out where their wisdom came from. Subscribe to news on the opposite side of the political spectrum. You can go deeper than Fox News or MSNBC. There's things that are really written that are wise, that are not done in a Hollywood fashion. If I was reading on the left, I would say read The Nation. That's a good periodical to read. If I was reading on the right, I'd say read National Review. Read something that's outside of your understanding of how things work, just to see the other perspective. Is there something that you're missing? Let me tell you what I know. I've had a pretty good mind my whole life. I know that my mind has been okay, but I've not always been so very wise. I've made life decisions without thinking about whether it was a wise decision or not, and I have paid a pretty price for those unwise decisions. Over the last 15 years, I have changed, and I've realized, maybe that's just a part of age, I have realized wisdom is what I desire above all things. What is wise? I read a book by Andy Stanley. It was a little book, but I thought it was fascinating, and it was about the question, what's the most important question you could ask? And I read this maybe 15 years ago. You want to know what the question is? What is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? Now, I can change it up a little bit. In light of my past experience, what is the wise thing to do? You ever been driving fast to make an appointment that you're late for, and you can just stop in the middle of crazy driving and say, in light of past experiences, getting tickets or messing the car up because I'm driving so fast, what is the wise thing to do? Maybe pull over and call them and say, I'm going to be 10 minutes late. I'm terribly sorry. Or flirting with the person who's in a bad relationship. Flirting with a person in a bad relationship. Can I look back in past experience and say, that didn't work out so well? What is the wise thing to do? Or maybe eating a 20-ounce steak at 9:30 at night. Anybody ever done that? And you look back and you say, I remember the pain that caused. What is the wise thing to do? Can you cut me off about 1/8 of that and I'll take the rest home? That's the wise thing to do. Second question you can ask yourself is, not in light of past experiences, but what about in light of my current circumstances? What is the wise thing to do? You ever been so mad at somebody that you started to write them an email and you had just fire coming out of your fingers as you're just smoke as you're writing it? And then you think, in light of my current circumstance, I'm mad, I'm ticked, I'm angry, I feel insecure, I feel like I've been attacked. Is it wise to push send? No, it is not. And you just put it aside for at least 24 hours to see if maybe there's something that you need to consider. And then thirdly, in light of my future hopes, this is the most powerful thing. In light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? The decisions you make today can rob you of the future that you long for tomorrow. What are you going to do? I've thought about some people that I know who had the opportunity to go be with their kids for the weekend. That was the plan. They were going to go and be with their kids for the weekend. But they met a sexy young person in a bar, and it's like this became the choice. And it wasn't just one weekend, it was subsequent weekends, and they were blowing off the future of having kids that they would have a great relationship with because they were not priority, and they became more and more just an absentee parent. What's wise? What about someone who says, I can work the extra shift to help the boss through this tight spot, or I can blow it off. I got some buddies, we can sit around and drink a few beers and just kick back tonight. What is the wise thing to do? You have to answer it. If we made our present decisions in light of our desired future, many decisions will be made differently. If you want to have money in the bank and money for retirement, that means you can't always buy the newest car. It means you can't have always the nicest house or the biggest TV or the most extravagant vacation. How do you make a wise decision? Some of the wisest people I've met are people who aren't the most educated, by the way, and some of the smartest people I've ever met aren't the most educated. Some of the smartest people I have ever met are not necessarily the most educated. I put Joyce in that category, my mother-in-law. Back when she went to school, it was a long time ago, 11th grade was top. That's where you left after 11th grade. But her brain is one of the sharpest brains I have ever been around in my life. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm talking about going to university and getting a PhD or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying have a desire for learning things. It can be a really good thing. And then be wise. And wisdom, I have known people that from an education point of view had none, but were the wisest people I have ever seen. I know you have too. I know you've sat in the presence of people that they are wiser than anybody you have ever met. It's a beautiful thing when you see it. Some struggle with learning, and I want you to not feel bad by a talk like this. You are not second class or second rate. Not everybody reads well. You need to find other ways. And some of the smartest people and most successful people on the planet, they don't do it through reading books. They do it through learning other ways. Some through learning by just touch, doing it. They have to get into the game. They have to get into the arena. But when they get in the arena, they can learn things. Some people learn auditorily. They just learn through hearing. That's what they need to do. Some learn through visual. That's how they can do it. And then some people can do it through reading. Whatever it is, don't feel bad. Just know, are you open to learning? Are you willing? I know some people, they stopped learning when they left high school. They're 62 years old. They've not learned anything. And they certainly haven't applied any kind of a wisdom. God loves everybody. Whether you're on the learning train or not, whether you're on a knowledge train or wisdom train, God loves you. But God does want to help you move from where you are to where you want to be. I found myself in the ditch so many times because I was smart, but I wasn't wise. And each time, you know what I found out when I was in the ditch, after I just ruined stuff, I found out that God still loved me. God wasn't through with me. God's attitude towards me actually never changed one bit. My shame made me change I was the one that was feeling shame because I was messed up again. But it was like God was just saying, Ray, one day you're going to choose wisdom. And when you do, you're going to have all these things you've wanted in life that you've been trying to get in all the wrong ways. I wonder if maybe somebody is here, and maybe, just maybe, that's where you are. You've not pursued wisdom. You've not said, what is the wise thing to do? And you found yourself just like I was, on the side of the road in the ditch because of me. And God is saying, I love you just as much as I ever have. I can't stop loving you. And one day, you're going to choose wisdom, and one day the road's going to become a better road for you. Would you believe this, please?